So our last speaker of this panel and of the day before we have our keynote is Jerome, I'm going to say Tryon, but it's Tryon, okay, who is from the Yale School of Architecture. Welcome.
Okay, let me make sure I know what I'm doing here. I'll just use the pen button. So yes, thank you for making it this far, and I'm excited to talk about drawings as everybody else has been. So it's a friendly room that way. I'm just going to start with a brief word about my title, Sites of Memory. Usually that's meant as a type of social gathering space where social memory is shared and it's shaped and reinforced. And I'm interested in reducing that down and thinking about that as kind of the space between the drawer, the delineator, and the drawing. So can the act of drawing become somehow incorporated into a site of memory? And so particularly with this, this project, what I'm interested in is eidetic memory, which is the memory image that we see soon after we just saw something else. So it's a part of short-term memory. It fades relatively quickly. For most people, some people 10 seconds, some people will go up to 2 weeks, but it is short-term memory. It will be discarded unless something happens to burn it sort of into long-term memory, which is a different process. So the wasp that was just on screen, some of you would be able to draw it. It may be gone for others. But that kind of ethereal aspect of memory is really interesting to me. So looking at these two images, both are drawn from memory. The left is an eidetic image of what a wasp should look like according to kind of the way that you would think of waspness. And on the right, forgive me for the term, on the right is more of an image of what the memory image itself looks like. So these two things in our memory arguably are interchangeable. We operate as if they're the same thing, but there's this really odd distinction between them. And I'm really interested in that. And I think drawing is an interesting medium to draw that out. So this project started really as just a set of observational notes about this tension between the way that we see, the way that we remember, and we interact in our world. The wasp became an important part of the project because they're really small. So to be able to see them well, you have to get close. But that's kind of dangerous because they can sting you, and that kind of burns them into your memory if you have been stung, as I have. So it became a very useful element to explore. And secondly, they're arguably architectonic, so they can be drawn with architectural conventions and bypass architectural styles. So there's no question of why are you drawing this building? What type of social memory does that embody? This is simply an object from nature. So I started looking at this tension between the different types of eidetic images that we see in our mind. And it was really just a way to try and categorize what I was remembering, what I thought I was remembering, what I wasn't remembering, where there was blank spots, and then eventually led to an actual reference. So the wasp on the left is actually the reference. The drawing on the right is the drawing from an eidetic image. This then continued through different sets of references, really trying to pin down what parts of memory stuck. Was it line work? Was it shape? Was it the elements of the wasp itself? So that was kind of campaign one. Campaign two moves into a more, slightly more rigorous approach of drawing a wasp from memories, not from memory, from reference. So this is drawn from reference, redrawing it, noting the difference, redrawing it, noting the difference, and continuing that process iteratively over a period of weeks. And it becomes apparent that the slippage of the eidetic image starts to really distort the wasp. It also becomes apparent that the drawing, the act of drawing, is not a neutral medium at all, but it actually plays back into the original memory image. So although I started out with the idea of the sort of innocence of drawing, that left during the process, and I started to lean into the spatial ambiguities that became present in the drawing process. not necessarily trying to lose the wasp at this point, but to open up more space for subconscious memory to pull out other readings of the drawings. So at this point, I wanted to see how far away from the actual wasp I could go, so the drawings become more and more divergent from the original eidetic memory, to the point that it may be unrecognizable, although as the drawer, I see it in there. I want to circle back and talk about exactly what I mean by memory in this project. Memory means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but I'm just lifting this quote from Helena Long as one of the most useful short definitions of memory, as the way that I'm thinking about it in this project, is that memory relates a present image to an absent object of past experience. So if that's the argument, and I'm going to try and diagram it, memory takes place in present perception. It's not like we go back in time to remember, but we, in our current perception, recall images that have happened in the past. For example, in just the act of seeing, if we see a cube head on, it looks like a square, but we know it's a cube. We know it has other sides. So our prior knowledge feeds into the perception that we have. So memory feeds perception, and perception also feeds memory. And this idea was popularized by Ernest Gombrich. I didn't know about it, so when I found out about this concept, it was really influential to me in the process. And this is what I want to propose as the site of memory. It's not that the drawing is a site of memory, but the drawing is a framework by which memory is, projective memory interacts from the viewer. So the viewer and the drawing then become a site of memory. So to go further, it's useful to separate sense perception and memory in the diagram, so this can be split. I'm still talking about memory, perception completely within the diagram, but memory is on the back end, sensory input is on the front end. Conscious memory happens within this cone where I'm focusing on it. Subconscious memory is outside of it. And then of course, subconscious memory feeds perception and helps us understand the world that we see in real time. So when we look at an image of a wasp, there's the eidetic image that's created in our memory for however long afterwards. If we've looked at a lot of images of wasps, there becomes kind of a complex, multifaceted object. And that is what I'm calling the eidetic object. So when I refer to that later, that's what I mean. It's not like a 3D model of a wasp, but it's more like a compilation of eidetic memories that can be called upon by the brain to produce an eidetic image according to the situation. It's, in my opinion, it fluctuates quite a bit. So there can be an attempt made to draw the eidetic object. I think drawing, again, is an imperfect medium. Although it's very good, I don't think it can actually capture the true nature of the eidetic object. It can just capture elements of it. If those elements align, then recognition happens. So I'm just kind of taking time to break down the diagram here. Obviously, the more images that there are of the eidetic object, they don't have to be exactly the same for recognition to still happen. As new information is fed into the eidetic object, simply from memory, that can update it and help one see deeper into images that have already been seen or new images. But then as stated, I was interested in what would happen if you got a little mischievous with the drawing of like still trying to capture the eidetic image, but allowing space for the subconscious to play. And if that happened through a series of drawings, would it be possible to start changing the recognition of the eidetic object through multiple drawings? And in fact, this is what happened through this process, that as I tried to remember WASP, I started remembering the drawings that I had done more than the original reference. So in that sense, the eidetic object did shift based on the drawing process. And then as I pushed that further into kind of spatial ambiguity and geometry, it wasn't like I could redefine my eidetic image of WASP into just pure geometry. There was a moment of disassociation and then reassociation with something new that had to do with the way I was drawing, that let's say was the weak formation of a new eidetic object without quite having recognition yet. So at that point, I became very fascinated in the kind of mark making and the reading present in these drawings. And I wanted to develop a way to more carefully turn that into an eidetic object, if you will. So much has been said about the picture plane, and I'm going to talk about the picture plane too. Quickly, it was an important idea for me that objectivity happens on this side of the picture plane, subjectivity happens on the other. Paraline or orthographic drawings are useful because they touch the picture plane, they can be measured, they can be then used for construction in objective reality. Arguably, the further that you go in, my argument, the further you go into the picture plane, the more subjective it becomes. So elements drawn in the picture plane, there can be multiple readings that are arguably correct, and who's to say one is correct over the other, but there are certain ones that are certainly more likely. Likewise, architectural convention, though it's made to, like plan sections, elevations, orthographic drawing, though it's made to operate in objectivity, it can also cross the picture plane and easily describe something that's subjective, therefore giving an objective positioning of a subjective cut. So if I cut through the image, I can develop a plan drawing that then annotates the different ways that I'm seeing images overlay themselves. I don't know if I said that very clearly, but I'm going to move on because I have a lot of slides. That can come up in the question and answer time if there's time. So these were the annotations that I was working with at the time. And of course, this process can be exercised on a more complex drawing. So here I'm doing a perceptual cut of the drawing itself. So I can't literally take the geometry because there's nothing there to be taken from. It's an elevational view. I can then project an elevation off of that, use that to project an axon. And again, this is an objective reading of a subjective, objective positioning of a subjective reading of a drawing. If that then is overlaid multiple times, I would argue that that gives a sort of map of likelihood of reading according to my experience. So even though a reading of a drawing is subjective, some readings are more likely than others according to this process that I was developing. And of course, as a designer, I thought, well, that would be a great idea to just build up the perception of a drawing from a plan-based process rather than doing an elevational drawing as we usually do. So in this process, I thought it'd be a great idea to split and fracture the picture plane, put the plan between it conceptually, and see if there could be some sort of eidetic knowledge that would be built up between the two kind of split images on the split picture plane. Of course, the question is, where does the eidetic object reside in that case? Is it associated with the drawings? Is it somewhere else? And this whole drawing went in my apartment at the time, which had 2 rooms configured like this. And it was situated in such a way that it was very difficult to see completely. So you kind of walk from one room to the other to be able to see the entire image, therefore forcing it into eidetic memory in the very act of trying to see it. And the final ambition was to lose the wasp. I thought it had done its work. So now I'm going to try and build up an eidetic image from pure spatial abstraction using the plan notation methodologies that I talked about earlier. This is the size of the drawing, roughly 16 feet from end to end. And so this is plan cut 1 with the associated partial elevations, plan cut 2, with the completed elevations, and then a last plan cut, which is more of like a universal spatial framework that goes over the whole system. And then lastly, finishing the elevations from their wireframe status. And this was the final drawing. This is a photo montage because you couldn't see the whole thing at once. And the split picture plane, the connection between the image and the split picture plane was tenuous at best. And kind of lastly, I didn't feel like there had been any really creation of an eidetic object. So I kind of put the project away. I worked on adjacent projects for a few months, and then I wasn't really circling back at this point, but I was drawing spatial frameworks again. I'll do a lot of these drawings just kind of trying to get ideas out. And I began to have a very particular memory of something I was trying to draw. And then a year and a half later, I had built this bridge for my nieces that needed a way to get to their friend's property. And on the plane back, I did these sketches by memory of the bridge, just trying to explore it back through memory the way that I could remember constructing it and moving through it. So looking at these two sets of drawings, these are the first framework drawings. I had this notion, notion is the only word I have for it, a very strong kind of spatial presence of something that was moving towards me, moving away, something that I was really trying to capture in elevation. Maybe there was a twist to it, but it was kind of like a Mobius strip without a twist. And I wasn't quite getting at it. And it wasn't until actually preparing for this presentation that I realized what I was trying to get at was the eidetic object that had been formed from this drawing process. So even though I was dissatisfied with this drawing and the outcome, I think there's traces that can be seen if I underlay the plan that I made for that drawing under these geometries. And of course, this isn't a floor plan. This isn't a typical way of looking at plan, but it's maybe more helpful to think of like a partial cut, partial elevation collapsed on itself. I think there are traces of geometric similarity that runs concurrent through all of these drawings. So I'll just kind of cycle through these. The proportions are relatively similar. The kind of action that I was hoping to put in elevation is sort of in plan. And this is all kind of obviously subjective. It's a subjective project. And then I also felt like the same thing was happening in these bridge drawings. I apologize for the quality of these. I meant to not apologize, but I'm doing it anyway because these are drawn on a plane. I had grand ambitions for these, but you know, you're jammed into a little seat. But I think the spatial similarities are present in a lot of these in interesting ways. And so if I go to kind of the concluding slide, the idea that I wanted to kind of convey and what I'm thinking about is if a drawing can be a site of memory, kind of an interaction between personal memories and create this eidetic object as an act of design. There's this kind of reduction on the left side of using drawing to reduce something that could be like a translation of the eidetic object. I'm not saying that it is the eidetic object itself, but then also on the right side, using iterative drawing in a plan methodology to build up an idea of an eidetic object with then eidetic outcomes. So it's kind of the first foray into, let's say, an eidetic design process. It's clean, it's tidy, except for it's not, because I found this drawing as I was putting this together that predates the WAFS series by 3 or 4 years. And the plan also, I think, fits quite nicely under that. So then the question is, was this the birth of the eidetic object? Is there some other kind of system of memory that is being drawn out through the images? I don't really know, but I think the geometric similarities are there enough to be provocative and stimulate further work for sure. So thank you.
I would like to say thank you so much. Very beautiful drawings, very beautiful design work too. I know there will be many people ask questions, so I only ask one question, so I can leave the other question for other people to talk to you. I think I would like to go back to the original. Of course, you have the plan elevation issues. I believe the question to other people is my question too. But I want to ask your first question about the memory, because I feel there's kind of two layers of things inside. Because we are human beings, we have conscious of being conscious, correct? So I think you have first layer of because you draw something what you like to see, because you only see what you like to see, right? That's the plan. But then you are conscious of that, which means you started to compare maybe how other people are going to see that. So your second layer of conscious kind of become like a social contrast. So your first layer was individual, like your personal contrast. But then you come to the social contract, you have a secondary C. What is that going to be maybe for normal people? So you have 2 layers. So the memory, I think that's a very tricky part. So I'm very curious about between these 2 layers of consciousness, how you translate from your first layer, which means is your personal individual contrast, then the second conscious about the social contrast. Thank you.
I think I would just distinguish between memory and consciousness in that point of, yes, the drawings are from memory, and the fact that there is a consciousness that they need to be talked about in a public forum, otherwise they're kind of meaningless. That is not a form of memory, that's simply consciousness. So that's an awareness that happens. I don't know if it happened in the drawing process. I don't remember it. But that was supposed to be a joke because they're memory drawings. But I certainly appreciate the question. And I tried, memory is super messy. Like, it's really hard to distinguish when you're in memory, when you're in a projected memory. And I tried to delineate that as clearly as possible in the presentation. That doesn't mean I actually think I have it figured out, but the drawings are the evidence of the reference of what I was trying to do.
Thanks for sharing. It's a super interesting project, and has me thinking about a lot of things, but maybe to ask a specific question that's kind of been funneling with greater degrees of presence through social media these days is the use of AI, machine learning, convolutional neural networks, generative adversarial networks, now popularized through things like Midjourney and DALL-E. Because essentially at some level, when you were showing your diagrams of the ways in which you were compounding images, they're like a training set that an AI would be experiencing. Whether or not that's memory, we call it memory because we use a metaphor to speak to the ways in which it's accessing and recalling patterns of pixels. But what do you think? Because some of your WASP images are feeling kind of Midjourney-y, and that's kind of interesting. There's something in that. There's something in the ways in which various levels of recall and the superimposition of a seamless kind of montage of things fitting together distorts and mutates into some kind of other unpredictable hybrid. Have you thought about this? Is this?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
so I mean, the drawings were done before AI really hit. And yes, I've thought about it. Do I have good answers? No, I don't, because I think it's a really interesting parallel. Both have to do with image training. The algorithm, if you will, is invisible. The people that program it can kind of control it. They can make it more real somewhat, maybe not. But it has to do with the main difference for me that still allows this to have value for me is that there's no training set of images that can be accessed by the public. This isn't something from the internet. So it is personal experience. And then the question is, if it is personal experience, like a training set, I don't know how close to draw the parallel. Can I shape that? And that was kind of the intention with the eidetic object of trying to think of ways to shape that through drawing iteratively. And its outcome is subjective. It's a subjective process. But I am really interested in pulling AI into the process. Unfortunately, you need 500,000 images for a good data set, and I have not that many. So we'll see where it goes.
Thanks, Jerome, for the really interesting talk. I don't know much about memory, but I believe it's enormously complex, and it's also situated. And I think when we start to talk about things like subject-object distinctions, that we're beginning to build orthographic projections, we're beginning to unbuild the situatedness of things in the world. And I just wondered if there'd be an account for things like you remembered a Pasolini film passage when you were on the airplane, but your dog had died en route to the airport. And there are a whole series of, again, I don't know a lot about memory reconstructions, but it's an extremely complex realm that has to do with imagination, your ability to track deep memory, actionable memory, your sensate conditions. But I just wondered about the situational structure of your thinking, because it seems to be, it's largely, I would say it's entirely absent.
Mhm.
And those things, I would say memory is situated. It's not, we can conceptualize it, diagram it, but again, I'm not a memory expert. The guy sitting on the other side of the wall there probably, or the guy with the beard over there, knows much more than I do. I just wondered about its desituatedness, the way the work is unfolded. I would call it desituated.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, no,
the
that's-
situational structure is enormously important with respect to memory.
So
This is dangerous.
yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I think that's important to note, because that was purposeful, because as soon as it's situated, like really situated, then it becomes so, at least for my process, so enormously complex that an intelligible conversation is just almost impossible, because memory at some point can almost be anything. So this was very much pulled out of situation and looked at in a very isolated way in order to try and start to form an idea of the way that eidetic memory may work.
I wonder if there's just a shift in terminologies as well then. Sorry. I just wonder if the because I think you inherit, when you're in the realm of memory and eidetic memory and so forth, you got quite a lot of stuff circulating. And I wonder if your work might develop its own terms, rather than, I think, in the dangerous territories that come with words like memory and.
Yeah, I have tried that. And this is iteration 1. Iteration 2 and 3 are more situated, but I don't have time to talk about them. And working into a more historically situated application of personal experience and memory is very interesting. So maybe that'll come out in the future.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed that, and some really delicious drawings and so on. And one of the things that made me think about was maybe the relational structure of this, and whether it might activate other people's memories as well as your own. And yesterday, Michael was talking about St. Ivo, Borromeo St. Ivo, and this morning when I was talking about the floating shadows and their perceptual position and what my consciousness was trying to do to them, because I of course I remember that shadows sit on surfaces, and I previously hadn't seen exceptions to that. In my experience, the shadow was moving backwards and forwards, and the closest architectural experience I've had to that is in St. Ivo, where because I've experienced, let's say, the archetype of Santa Agnese or something, but also many churches like that, square churches with a dome and etc., chapel either side, entrance and altar, and I remember those things, and I go into St. Ivo, and it has very many characteristics that are reminiscent of those places, and yet I go into this triangular space that is very much like that, but is not like that, that between my memory or my consciousness or my perception, I construct an anamorphic space that is neither the space I'm in nor the other spaces that I've experienced, that maybe he makes me construct the sort of distortions that happen in San Carlo in myself, rather than having to build it. And it seems that there are mechanisms that you're playing with that are not just formal adaptations, but can mess with each of us in very engaging ways, you know, implicate us very directly in the content of what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that, and part of that, I think, is the, dare I call it, magic of drawing. As part of the joy of drawing is, yes, it's a singular activity if I'm the one drawing, but to share it like this, as you're saying, we all project our own memories and thoughts back onto the images. So then that's arguably what I would call the site of memory, is the drawing operating as a framework, not as if it's the finished thing, but it's the thing that's open there for the beholder to finish with their own take on not only kind of narratively what it is, but visually the way that we see. I don't know if it's useful to say I had this fantasy of the way that I could actually present this, and I forgot to show this. I've been doing these accordion drawings, and this is sort of the next iteration on the bridge work. So it's a long drawing that folds into itself, but it also folds back onto itself. So in, say, a 10-foot drawing, I can have over 100 compositions. And so I have 3 of these that I've been working on, and I was going to pass them out and have people start looking at them. So by the time I got to the work, half of the people would have a different experience of the work via being influenced by the sketchbooks, sort of lending my perception to the audience, and then the other half wouldn't. Of course, that didn't happen, so it's a beautiful description. So it actually happened perfectly. But I'll pass this around.
Perfect. Thank you, Jerome. And after that, maybe we can put it in the front.
Absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.